I was regarded at Harvard Business School as being a communist.
This one is a bit of a mystery still, when my first tweet is going to happen.
I call it catching the F train.
I didn't know marketing. And so this is how I was able to maybe frame this job, which didn't exist.
Hi everybody, here we are for the 6th episode of the WFA Better Marketing Podcast. I hope you've enjoyed the great marketeers we've listened to so far, and you're certainly going to enjoy who we're about to listen to. Now at this point, I should probably insert a minor health warning because today's guest is Mark Ritson, and Mark is well known for being one of the greatest marketing writers and thinkers in the world, and also he does occasionally use profanities, so please don't be offended by them. Because it's absolutely worth listening to what Mark's got to say. Mark, welcome. Fantastic to see you. Thanks so much for joining us. A real privilege for all of the WFA to hear from you. And I always like to start with the obvious question in these interesting times. How are you? How have you coped? How are things?
Oh, I'm good, mate. I'm good. I was pretty isolated before COVID was invented or occurred, whatever happened. You know, we've been living in Tasmania for 15 years, so isolation and being locked up is not something that's new to me. So yeah, I'm doing well, mate. I'm doing very, very well, thank you.
I'm delighted to hear it, and I thoroughly enjoyed your intervention in the WFA Global Marketer Week, which I guess you did from that studio. So you've got a great setup there.
I did. I was a bit interested how it would go down, because we sort of agreed. Stefan was terrific because he was sort of like, can you talk about some of the themes? And so I obviously bent them a little bit, right? But look, I'm glad it didn't. I thought it might go down really badly, but it went down probably too well, I think. I don't know, you're better placed than me to comment, right? But it seemed to be too positively accepted, which is not a good sign, I think, sometimes. You want a bit of tension,
Yeah, no, I think it was a great reminder that everybody needs to focus on the basics of marketing, but I did wonder whether Orlando Bloom had been in touch with you for a bit of brand work.
I mean, it's interesting. What did happen was a lot of marketers did email me and say, I really like what Orlando Bloom said. And I was like, well, fair enough, but it doesn't stop it being a total load of bollocks nonetheless. Do you know what I mean? Like earning your breakfast and all that. I suppose there is a proportion of the industry that do that kind of thing, right? So no comment.
Yeah, I mean, interesting bit because in a way, I've always enjoyed your writing and you've always called it, I think, very clearly and, purpose bollocks, I think you coined. When you hear a lot of people saying things, but then you look at their companies and go, are you actually delivering this? And it's obviously because it's fashionable. I mean, have you seen much of that through this interesting phase?
Yeah, more than ever. I think there are three problems with purpose bollocks or purpose wank, right? I mean, there are a small number of companies that are doing it properly, we should add, but not many. Mostly it's very rich executives worrying about things that the working man and working woman doesn't worry about. You know what I mean? It's Bob Hoffman has that great line about go and open your refrigerator and look at everything inside your refrigerator. How many of those things did you buy because of the company or the purpose behind them? And get back to reality. And, purpose is a massive load of shit. For 95% of companies, it doesn't pass the 3 C's test. As you say, the companies aren't really delivering on purpose. Most of them are avoiding tax legally in a disgraceful way, for starters, and destroying the planet at the same time. It's not passing the competitor test. All these brand purpose things look exactly the same as we saw with COVID. And I remain unconvinced that most consumers really are driven by purpose most of the time. Sure, they'll say that they are when you ask them in a certain way, but it's massively overreported. So yeah, I think we're in a really crap place. And I really think most marketers are embarrassed to make a profit and a good product while still being responsible about the environment and the way that it's made and the way they interact with culture. But, you can do that without getting carried away, but it's so fucking worthy that, marketing has always been a bit pathetic. It's just, being pathetic in a modern way.
Yeah, and I do think epitomised by the kind of vocabulary that Orlando Bloom was using, and the glorious contrast with Tom Holland, who to use another odd word, incredibly relatable, because you read that and go, yeah, same thing. I wake up in the middle of the night, and actually that
Totally.
the way of are you doing that? You're waking up in the middle of the night?
Mate, repeatedly, and I am using my iPhone to take a piss. Yeah, like the rest of the population. The minute he said that, see, the first paragraph, Orlando's hiking at 6 a.m. to earn his breakfast, and Tom Holland is trying mightily to take a piss using his iPhone to hit the target. You know who you identify with immediately. You know what I mean? Someone telling the truth and someone talking shit. And I think on a more serious level, marketers have left the building. They are not connected to the working men and women who don't have aspirations of brand purpose. They do have a purpose, but most working class people, and they tend to dominate most markets, have a purpose which is to pay their mortgage or rent and keep their family ticking over. And there ain't nothing wrong with that either. Again, not at the expense of the planet or animals or cultural issues, but we're very dislocated right now from the real population, I feel.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it seems to me that this is accelerated because of the pandemic. Because obviously, you remember early on all those ads that said we're all in this together. To which I always thought, well, we're absolutely not. What are you talking about? And actually, there were many reels put together where the sea of sameness was the frightening thing. And actually, I do, going back to your WFA intervention, reminding people that the primary job of marketing is to drive growth. And on the whole, it's supposed to be profitable growth. So you don't do it by renting volume. You do it by understanding what you're doing, who you're doing it for, and doing it better. It's not rocket science, but it's those basics seem to me horribly lost.
That's right, David. And I think we can add another word, which is sustainable. So sustainability means that if you are a proper non-moronic capitalist, you also want to make sure the planet survives so you can continue to create products and services. And that might not be the most noble rationale for sustainability, but it's probably the one that will save the planet. Is that, the realization that if we destroy the planet, there isn't any more money to be made, is a very good way to get a lot of venal people to pay more attention to environmental issues. So, yeah, I think sustainability in a less worthy interpretation is also worth repeating, right? Let's make money in a way that doesn't destroy the planet or is not long-term in terms of profit generation.
Yeah, my old boss at Coke, from whom I learned bucket loads, Sergio, used to talk about renting volume and how easy it was to rent volume, but it's not sustainable. And the magic dust of marketing is when you get sustainable growth and you build brands that do that. And it's quite odd. I mean, having been around marketing for a long while, it's odd to watch all of the language change so dramatically. And you go, what are you talking about? Because it's all the same as it used to be. There are more channels, there's more feedback loops at pace and so on. I mean, as you do the mini MBA, which, by the way, I hear people eulogizing about, the most interesting thing to me is the number of people who are experienced and long in the tooth who've done it, actually, and are reminded of, what a joy it is to do things properly. I mean, are you seeing a return to basics? Are people calling this out more than they used to?
No, I think, look, there's two answers to that, right? I think the first one is no. I don't think we're anywhere near the top of the bullshit mountain. I think it's going to get a lot worse. But the other thing is, which gives me some comfort, is I don't really fucking care. So, I don't want, you're in a different position from me, David. You have to care, and you're a good man because you do care. I have no affiliation to marketers generally, right? I am very keen on the marketers I work with on the mini MBA being better than all the other marketers and getting the better jobs and so on, and the clients I work with being more successful in the market. So I actually like it that the world is full of so much piss at the moment, because it doesn't worry me that marketing might be, full of all this piss. I actually like the idea that there's a few marketers out there that know what they're doing and they're smashing it, and everyone else is, blundering around talking rubbish. I think that's great, right? I think that, we're not, you are, because, your role is different than mine, but I don't represent marketing in general. I just represent specific marketers against others in competition, so that the more deluded they get, the easier it is to make money. And I think that's fantastic,
Yeah. But I mean, I think can I ask you where you found your brand, as it were, and your tone of voice? Because obviously, I followed you. I think you and I first were together on a panel back in my Vodafone days, so maybe 15 years ago. And I think
That's right.
you were already you were in the groove that you're in now. But your brand is priceless in itself, and it is to do with this, calling it like it is, being really straightforward. How did you find that voice? And were you always like that? Were you a pissy 16-year-old, or was it?
No, I wasn't. I was. I tell you exactly what happened. When I was a professor for about 7 or 8 years before I started not giving a shit in the nicest possible way. I did an event with a very famous strategy professor called Gary Hamill, who's another professor at London Business School, and I was kind of his warm-up act, and then he did the main talk. And we did it for LBS alumni in London, and I was dead keen to meet Gary Hamill because he's kind of a rock star. And I did my talk, and I worked for weeks on it, and nobody really thought it was any good. They just it was a ripple of polite applause. And then Gary Hamill didn't even turn up. He was on a screen, and this is 20 years ago. He was on a screen from California, literally sitting at his breakfast table in what I remember is a dressing gown, buttering his toast, just talking inanely about strategy, you know what I mean? And it was just total fucking bullshit, in my opinion. And I was just like, what the fuck is this, right? I've just worked on this amazing presentation about brands, and then this guy turns up in a negligee in California, just like going, people ask me about strategy. What strategy? And I was like, what the fuck is this? But I looked at the audience, and they were just like, they were eating it up like it was, the Beatles had reformed. And it really blew me away that this guy could just turn up and just patently not do any work. And when it finished, no one even noticed me. And everyone was just like, oh my God, Gary was great. So I went and had 3 pints of Guinness in the pub next door and just tried to work out what had just happened. And I realized that Gary Hamill was a brand and I was a generic professor talking about brands. And that was and Gary Hamill had basically just taught me a very important lesson and took me back to school. And I think that really was the moment I went, you know what I mean? What am I doing here? Gary Hamill's getting paid to be Gary Hamill. That's a very good place to be, And I never got to be as famous as him, but that was the moment I was like, right, it's time not to be like all these other people, It's time not to create some false persona. That there's people with Mohicans and shit who are creating these false identities, but let it loose. Do you know what I mean? Let it loose and be, life is short. Go for it.
Yeah, it's funny though, isn't it? Because it's some great advice. Bit like my most recent version of that is when I first started at RBS. I went in to see. I had to go to the strategy offsite, and it was the week before I started, and I popped in to see the head of internal recruitment to kind of have a national. I said, look, Stuart, you got any last advice for me before I start this? And he said, yes, and I want you to listen very carefully because it's very important. Be yourself.
I remember you 15, 20 years ago, Dave, being like that, yeah, and it's standing out at that point. I remember you writing about dogs chasing cars not that long ago, you know what I mean? Yeah. It was so inimitably in your voice that it was more effective as a result, do you know what I mean? And I think it's all very well me. I mean, I've been a lone gunman, really. I've been a professor, and you can do anything you like as a professor. I was always impressed that you were so frank and honest in companies where you normally had to, suck it up a lot, right, and be very political, and yet somehow you were able to climb the greasy pole while being as frank as you were. I thought that was quite amazing,
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, it's tough to do, isn't it? Because at the moment, one of the things I really enjoy doing is mentoring people. And there is that, that thing when you got to kind of help people find their own voice, because you also see the kind of attempts of people copying a Mark Ritson, but they're not Mark Ritson. They can't copy you. They can't copy me. Oscar Wilde famously said, I have to be myself because everybody else is taken. But it is difficult because I think it was at Vodafone one day when I was on the outside. I went into I think it was an expo meeting, and it was Guy Lawrence who said, "Oh, here he comes. Our insultant is here." And that thing when you can say, and the problem when you're on the inside of a company, because you literally feel it, is you're obliged to fit in and play the politics, and it takes a while to kind of know that your value is not to do that. And actually, that's where, one of the things I always tell people I think is massively underrated is the disproportionate importance the person you report to has in your career. And, whether they give you the space to be yourself, do what you want and so on, and support you when it goes wrong, because of course it goes wrong. And I've had some great ones and I've had some not so good ones. But for you, I mean, let's go back to, when you were consulting for the big luxury brands. Did you take your style into those fora as well, or did you temper it somewhat?
A little bit. I mean, a lot of it was done in my bad French, right? So it's weird how when you change language a little bit, you also change the style of everything as well, I do remember, my favourite memory is I worked for LVMH all those years, and I worked for, one of my jobs was for Dior. Sidney Toledano, the CEO of Dior, was very taken with me because I was such an unlikely looking fucker, right? Because he was surrounded by a lot of very beautiful, elegant women and about the same number of very beautiful, elegant, usually gay, not always men. And I was just this fat unit, you know what I mean, in a suit, and it was clear that I was not the same as the others. And he actually said to me at one point, "You must be good," inferring that I look so unlikely that my presence must be driven by something else. But I was pretty much, as 15 years in the company, I got to be sort of comfortable at the end with all the CEOs of all the different brands. And, the great thing about luxury, don't get me wrong, when I started, I was shitting my pants every day. I mean, going to Paris and meeting, Gilles Hennessy and Monsieur, the big knobs of the company, your balls shrivel to the size of peanuts, But by the end of it, I was pretty comfortable, and I was, I really learned that, luxury is very, very relative. And if you ask the men and women who really were at the heart of luxury, both from the great families, the artisan families that I work with, they all said the same thing, which is that luxury is personal and luxury is taste. And, confidence and knowing what you like and what you don't like is the ultimate luxury, you know what I mean? And it's only really shallow people that think that luxury is this shop and not that shop. It's rubbish, Yeah. Luxury is the ultimate luxury is the taste and confidence to say I like that and I don't like that, Yeah. And I think there's room for that. And I think that's the trick of all luxury branding, is it comes down fundamentally to knowing what you want and allowing one man's luxury is another woman's non-luxury, and that's super cool,
Yeah. And did you really apply the same kind of rigor of basic marketing to those brands that you counsel everybody else to do?
Yeah, very much so. When I started, it was dead interesting. It sounds weird. It was the turn of the century, and there weren't many professors teaching brand management. So I was headhunted really because they were having a few problems creating a house of brands. And there were only 4 or 5 professors, and I got the gig. And it was really interesting. I got 6 months to work out what, we had to create a philosophy of branding at LVMH. So I met all the founders, spent a lot of time in France and elsewhere, and was able to build a kind of different branding logic, but it was still based on the fundamentals. And yeah, I think they're still teaching the course. I gave up because I didn't want to go to Paris anymore. But the course that I created is still running 20 years later, pretty much in the same format. And yeah, it wasn't that different from what we would, what we'd have done at Vodafone or anywhere else.
And do you consult today? Are you still actively consulting, or are you a writer, speaker?
Worse, it's a really big issue with me. When COVID hit, I mean, I was doing 2 weeks a month for about 20 years consulting, and very rarely in Australia, even though I've been down here a long time. So when COVID hit, mini MBA was just taking off. And so those two things, mini MBA being such a lot of work and such a lot of money, frankly, and COVID meant that was kind of the end of my consulting career. And I don't miss it, but it also means I have a half-life now where, you know, I'm not comfortable teaching marketing if I'm not doing it. I'm going to become like all the wankers at university who've never done a day's marketing in their life and are busy teaching MBA students how to do it, you know. So I'm conscious of that. But yeah, I don't think I'll get back to any proper consulting, which is a big regret. But I just think it's, you know, the world has changed. And frankly, mini MBA is so big now that, you know, my days of having time to go out and work for clients are almost zero. I do probably a couple of days a month on video, but it ain't the same. Like the whole point of my kind of consulting was it was 6 or 7 years working with the client, doing proper work. I'm just not doing that anymore. And it troubles me greatly that I'm not, because I think it makes me ultimately a phony and I can't teach it down the line, you know.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because you've got to be actively doing it. I'm extremely conscious of that. I do a bit, but it's not the same, you know, as I was, how can I do this? Oh, no, I'll do it. You won't mind. You know, I was talking with Sir John Hegarty at the Festival of Marketing. He and I were on a panel, and my middle son was in the audience next to a bloke who was saying to him, what's amazing about this is you can see that one of them is still doing the day job and the other one's lost in the clouds. And actually, because I do think, and I say that with, you know, all total respect for everything Sir John has done, which has been remarkable, but you know, you can't sit and go, it's all the fault of global clients these days. It's, you know, it's not that simple.
That's right.
And actually,
you're absolutely right. And I think the danger is we all start to be, you know, there's this massive echo chamber on Twitter and in social media around marketing, which is totally full of bollocks, right? You know, CFOs are making everyone short term and all that rubbish. You know, what a lot of bollocks. You know, should we be creative or should we be, you know, analytical? What a lot of bollocks. You know, fucking rubbish. and if you know what I mean, just questions that idiots that have never ever done any proper work would ask, right? And so the danger is you and I become part of that, you know, and I can't think of anything worse. I'd rather do something else than become part of that idiot army who, you know, I mean, I've never done real work, you know what I mean? But I've properly done shoulder to shoulder stuff for a long time. And once you stop doing it, I mean, I think I can get a couple more years where I'm still kind of in touch. But at some point you become the complete assholes that you've spent your career hating, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think that because there's a different variety of that, isn't there? It's a bit like, you know, we had some friends round for dinner yesterday, and one of them said, "Oh, so how are you enjoying your retirement?" I said, "Well, may I remind you that the most important thing to say is the time I stepped down from full-time work, COVID arrived, so it'd be an odd word to use, enjoy. And also, I've got no intention of retiring. I was described recently as blissfully semi-retired, which will do me. I'll take that." But I think, you know, you've got to keep your brain in it, because my big fear is to be anecdote man. You know, you and I know those people who've got great war stories, and we could do the same. We could sit in a pub and tell each other stories from days gone by, but you want today's stories and you want to learn from them. And can I just ask you, because one of the things that blew me away, I didn't know for quite a long while that you lived in Tasmania, and based on what you write and how you write about what's going on in the UK, you seem to have your finger incredibly on the pulse. I mean, how do you do that? I mean, how do you immerse yourself in what's going on?
Well, I was still there, you know. So I mean, I've been married for 20 years, and we only started having kids 5 years ago because I just wasn't around, you know. So in my 15 years in Tasmania, I would have been in London, you know, on average 8 or 9 times a year. Do you know what I mean? It was just mental. It was completely mental. So yeah, I kept in touch, and I've got another parallel life in America. Same thing, where I'm at least the East Coast, I'm pretty well connected there because, again, I was in New York 6-7 times a year with different companies doing different things. So, yeah, it was more just the insane 20-year period where you just lived on a Qantas plane. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And being on the ground, in 3 or 4 companies, in a period of 2 weeks is often a better way to learn than doing a year in one company. You come in, you see the same shit, and then you're out again, and you're connected. So yeah, it was the physical proximity that and COVID played into my hand in the sense that I'd already been managing a career from distance for all these years. It didn't throw me as much as I think a lot of people who had to learn from the ground up how to do it without physically being there.
But have you missed the travel? Have you missed going to New York, coming to London?
No.
It's interesting. I mean, I would certainly. All I miss now is an annual trip to London and an annual trip to New York. The rest of it, Switzerland and Paris and all that, nah. And I used to do a lot of trips to what we call the mainland, which is Sydney and Melbourne, which is still 2 hours away by plane. I don't miss that at all. That's been a real win. Is not doing that anymore. So no, I'm quite happy. Yeah, it's been, Tasmania is a weird place. We're extraordinarily independent of everywhere else. We've had no COVID. We have had, I think, a total of 9 deaths since it started. Wow. And we've been COVID-free for 18 months. But the island was closed for over a year. We just didn't let anyone in. So there you go, So, yeah, Tassie's been I feel for a lot of the different people out there. But Tasmania's had it easy. And so COVID's been light on us, which is a blessing,
And what about, are you overrun with mice at the moment, or are they not there either?
No, they don't get across the Bass Strait. No. We've got a lot of fucking wallabies, I'll tell you that.
And listen, to return to marketing for a bit. I mean, as we enter a kind of changing cookieless world, maybe this is the time that digital marketing and its overpromise will get found out. I mean, what's your current thinking on that divide that people suggest there is between marketing and digital marketing? And obviously Gary V has made a massive money and airtime spouting about that.
Yeah, look, Gary, I mean, Gary's obviously I think he's handled it very well. If you or I were as famous as him, I don't know whether we'd have dealt with it, as he seems like a decent fellow, but most of what he says is total cock, right? And really quite damaging when you have that much influence on marketing. And yeah, he is representative of this digital nonsense, which it continues to bemuse me, right? I don't understand why we need to use the D word, right? When more than 50% of radio is now digitally downloaded. TV, as we know, with SVOD and BVOD, is more and more digital. Most news companies, New York Times is 70% digital, outdoors 75% digital. I just don't get what anyone's banging on about. And the frustration is it just gets in the way of media neutrality and doing, there's so much data that is so clear. I don't understand why marketers keep missing the point. If you take money out of Facebook and put it on TV, the combination works better. And if you take money out of TV and put it on Facebook, the combination works better. The answer was always not or, but and, Yeah. And it's Jim Collins talks about the tyranny of the or and the genius of the and we just need marketers to realize it isn't digital versus traditional. The words don't mean anything. They're just all tools, and the more of them we bring together in a campaign, the more effective we are, and it's a real frustration, but I don't see it going away, David, anytime soon. I really don't. I think we've created these myths, and now we're going to live with them for our careers, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that's kind of odd is watching some of the highest end management consultants talking in this language and talking about the total shift to digital marketing and performance marketing and so on. And you read that and go, this is just dreadful. And who's going to call that? Because a lot of people believe, that the consultants, a lot of CEOs do. And it's tough to kind of fight that corner in a company. And I think for marketeers, they've got to stick to the basics because the data is so clear. I mean, again, early on. I think you did a great, early in the pandemic, you were doing some great writing and speaking around. Look at the data on what's happened in recessions and keep investing. You did a brilliant piece recently about multi-channel and how that drives efficacy. And all you got to do, and that's the same in every category. It's astonishing to me that you can sit in a meeting and people, because the problem with my color hair, and you're not quite here yet, is people go, well, of course, you don't understand digital, which I find the most insulting thing. And as we kind of draw to the end of a fantastic conversation, what's the one piece of advice you would give a marketer today?
Look, I think there's a couple I would suggest, right? The first one is get into the market as much as you can. So the fancy word for it is ethnography, but I think that sometimes is a barrier, right? There's nothing like a marketer that goes into the market and just watches consumers and hangs out in the point of sale. And that's the best training of all, right? So those marketers always move faster, right? Yeah. In a meeting, the marketer that says, "Oh, look, I was down in I was in the Vodafone shop yesterday for 2 hours. This is what's going on." That always cuts through the bullshit. And the other thing is try and swim away from tactics to strategy. So, it's easy to get caught up in tactical stuff, especially communications. It always depends on strategy. And, strategy isn't a complex thing. It's ultimately very straightforward, right? Strategy is essentially answering the questions of targeting, positioning, and objectives. Get that done first, and you'll always be in pretty good shape. And I think they're the two things that I think will serve you well in a decent career. Get yourself a bit of market exposure, direct, and don't be afraid to ask the strategy questions before you get into tactics.
And I'm sure people talk to you about, young'uns, about where they should start in marketing. I mean, I've always been a fan of both sides of the fence. Good to work in agencies, good to work client side, and better to work in both. But where would you tell people to start out?
Look, agencies are great. It's very rare to meet anyone over 30 that's still happy. I have to be honest. There are a few people, but the odds are against you. At some point when in your early 20s, free beer and getting laid a lot are massive career incentives. But at some point they start to get less attractive, and there's a natural pull across to the client side. And I think at that point, there is a new orthodoxy. I mean, it used to be P&G and Unilever, and it still is. But I do think these days the Googles and the Amazons are also a good place to get into before you turn 30, because you're going to get a good training there, and they do a good job, So nothing wrong with starting out in an agency, but you know better than me. I think, unless you're making a ton of dough, most people want to head client side. And I think the most interesting point is that management consulting, McKinsey and Bain, started because you couldn't make strategy choices until you became a CEO, which for a 30-year-old business school graduate, she's 30 years away from being able to do that. Brand consulting and marketing consultancy aren't the same thing. It's not as much fun. You can be a brand manager at 28 and you can be a marketing manager at 25. And you can run a brand. You can do it. You know what I mean? So I think the great joy of our industry is, big or small, running a brand. And being responsible for it is the greatest job in the world. And too many people are attracted to consulting. And in marketing, it's the greater joy is to run a brand and be responsible for it. What a brilliant career that is,
No, I concur, and I wholeheartedly recommend people to do that. And again, as we read these things about the death of brands and brands don't matter anymore, I mean, what planet are those people living on?
That's a funny one, David. That's the return of economists, right? Who, they've been pissed off for 30 years because they've got rational thinkers and all of that. And marketing and brand came along and just fucked up economics completely. So, they're trying to now argue, and this is how moronic they are, right? Because there's so much information out there now. You can be very rational and you don't need a brand. That's bollocks, right? You don't go online and go, I don't need a brand now because I can read all these reviews about these tennis shoes, What a load of fucking rubbish, Brands become more important as the nature of information and complexity increases. You know what I mean? But anyway, don't get me started on that one. I'll be there all night.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. Well, listen, another question we always like to ask is who else would you like to see in these podcasts? Who should we try and get in front of a microphone next?
I would suggest, I really like that whole team at KFC, I think, are doing a fantastic job. So I'd be looking at that senior team. I think it's mostly, it's almost exclusively female too. But
Right.
have a crack at getting one of the senior team from either from down in they're down, where are they now? They're down in Texas, aren't they? Or the UK team, Megan's team in the UK. I think KFC is doing interesting stuff, and I reckon that would be one of the senior marketers. And there's a few CMOs
Right.
dotted around the planet. That would be a really good interview.
All right. Well, look forward to that. But Mark, what a delight to see you, and thanks for taking the time to talk to us. And listen, I would love to see you in Tasmania. I've never been to Tasmania, so when we can travel again, I'm threatening you with a visit.
Oh, Dave, I'd love that, mate. I've got a massive cellar. When I left Moet Hennessy, they sent me, as we say in France, a fuckload of fine wine. And I've got a massive cellar with a great big bar under my hedge when I regularly go down on my own and get arseholed. But it would be great having you down there. We could get down there for a couple of days and we could sort the world out several times.
All right, Mark. All right. Thank you so much. Have a great day. See you soon.
My pleasure, Dave. Take care.
Right. Well, what can I say? I did forecast it would be a great conversation with the occasional profanity, again, for which apologies. But how wonderful to listen to Mark's incisive brain, who has always got things worth listening to. And for any marketeer, some great stuff there. So again, thanks to Mark. I'm looking forward to our next episode. I know we're lining up one of the world's greatest marketeers, but because it's not confirmed yet, I'll leave it at that. Meanwhile, enjoy the Euros if you're watching them, and let's please not lose on penalties. Bye.